There are certain Pokemon abilities that I believe don't get enough credit for how good they actually are. Maybe this is because not enough Pokemon get them, or they just don't sound very exciting. But why don't we showcase some of these abilities today? Underrated Pokemon abilities that are actually very good, considering how little they are talked about. First up we have Marvel Scale, and it kind of makes sense why this one is scarcely talked about because not that many Pokemon get it. But Marvel Scale is quite good. This ability will grant a 1.5x defense boost if the Pokemon is suffering from a status ailment. It's kind of like a defensive version of the more famous ability Guts, which grants an attack boost if your Pokemon is suffering from a status ailment. The only Pokemon that can use this ability in much of a competitive context is Milotic, because the only other two Pokemon that get it are Dratini and Dragonair, who are not fully evolved Pokemon. But Milotic actually gets a lot out of this ability in the generations where it's relevant in OU. Gen 3 is Milotic's best generation, and Marvel Scale comes up often to save this Pokemon's life. A common way to power through passive defensive Pokemon like this is to paralyze them and apply pressure to them so that eventually they won't be able to heal and will slowly but surely fall. If you stack flinch moves on top like Rock Slide, the paralysis chance and the flinch chance result in a pretty likely outcome of inactivity for the Pokemon. But Milotic is sort of innately resistant to paralysis, because if you paralyze it, you increase its defense. So those rock slides that you're trying to flinch with will deal extremely low amounts of damage, decreasing the chance of you actually powering through the guy. Milotic can also pick and choose when it wants to remain status. Milotic commonly uses Refresh, which cures status, and more directly threatening status ailments like Toxic and Burn that have a damage over time effect usually want to be cured by Refresh, but there are some cases where Milotic actually wants to stay statused purely for the defense buff, so it can be more sturdy against physical attackers like Metagross, Aerodactyl, and Tyranitar. This is an example of an ability that doesn't sound amazing, but surprisingly comes up often in battles and can save your life more than you would expect. It's no Magic Guard or Regenerator, but it's a solid ability that gets considerable value. And although Milotic is not officially ranked OU in Gen 4, it is used quite a bit in this format by top players in the modern metagame, and part of the reason for that is because of Marvel Scale. Gen 4 is a format with a lot more paralysis spreading than Gen 3, with Latias having Thunder Wave and of course Jirachi having Body Slam. So it's really nice to have a Pokemon that gains a defense boost when paralyzed, and we all know about Jirachi's Body Slam plus Iron Head combo. You paralyze them with Body Slam and then you have a 60% flinch chance with Iron Head on top of the paralysis chance, but against a paralyzed Milotic, you're dealing such little damage that the chances of Jirachi actually breaking through Milotic are incredibly low. I think it would be fantastic if more Pokemon got this ability. I think it's a good ability that is well balanced and creates fun situations in game, where there's a bit of a decision about whether you want to status the guy or not. Sometimes it's still worth it to status Milotic, but it does make you question the decision since they get a benefit from it. And imagine if a Pokemon with Marvel Scale got the ability Psycho Shift or something. That would be a fun synergy. You put a Flame Orb on it to get a defense boost, and you can also burn the opponent by Psycho Shifting the burn off to them. That would be fun. Next we have a Horse ability, and horses are a generally underappreciated animal in society, aren't they? Actually, that's not really true. Horses are well respected. I take that back now that I think about it. But regardless, this ability first appeared on the horse Pokemon Mudsdale, and it is the ability Stamina. This ability is just straight up amazing. Stamina will grant your Pokemon a +1 defense boost every single time they are damaged by an attack, whether it's physical or special. Unfortunately, the ability is not good enough to make Mudsdale viable single-handedly. Mudsdale is still low tier, but they eventually did give this ability to a different Pokemon. The Pokemon Archaludon, who is a recent Gen 9 Pokemon, gained Stamina as its ability after eating Mudsdale, which was a very controversial moment for the series. Archaludon simply ate Mudsdale to absorb his power for himself, and with the horse spirit inside of him, Archaludon now has the stamina of a workhorse, and he may also gain a defense boost every time he is struck. If you weren't aware, Archaludon is a banned Pokemon in competitive singles. Part of the reason this Pokemon was so difficult to deal with was actually because of the stamina plus body press combo. Body press is a fighting type physical attack that deals damage based on your defense stat rather than your attack stat. And there's a clear synergy, of course, with stamina and body press. This is an insane combo, in fact. This combo would be good on just about anything. But on Archaladon, it was particularly problematic because it meant that special walls couldn't respond to Archaladon very well. Archaladon was prominent on rain teams with its move Electro Shot, which also raises its special attack. Oh, a special attacker? No problem. Let me go to my Blissey. Wait a moment, I'm now dead to body press in a single hit. And if you try to attack Archaladon, it simply gains more and more defense with which to power up its body press. The ability Stamina, not talked about that often. Probably because it's only on 2 noteworthy Pokemon. One of the Pokemon that has Stamina is a bit too weak for competitive singles, and the other one is a bit too powerful. It would be nice to see a balanced Stamina user in the future, to take advantage of this unique ability that I think is quite cool and fun. And I hope we see more Pokemon with Stamina in the future. Perhaps a new sort of horse. We'll have to see. Up next is a fun ability that I think is flavorful. The Pokemon Palisand has this ability, and I'm quite fond of Palisand, a sandcastle themed Pokemon. A ground ghost type. A spirit is possessing the sand and imbuing it with life. How wonderful. And Palisand has the ability Water Compaction. This ability will grant a defense boost of +2 stages to your defense if damaged by a water type attack. Very flavorful because of course sand becomes a bit harder when it is wet. That's how you make a sandcastle. Very smart. Now unfortunately this ability is kind of awkward in practice on Palisand specifically because the guy is weak to water. So you don't really want to take a water hit in any context, and receiving a defense boost after already being struck by a big water type hit doesn't really help you either. So it sort of doesn't work here. But can you imagine this ability on something that wasn't weak to water? That would be pretty good. Water type attacks are commonly thrown around in competitive. It's one of the most common types. Flip Turn and Scald and Hydro Pump. All sorts of water type attacks exist. What if throwing out a water type attack was now a risk and you could play into the Water Compaction? What if a Water Compaction Pokemon had Body Press? That would be good. Maybe something like Hisuian Gudra. Can we justify that logically? Does a snail like to swim in the water and get defense from that? I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say that's the case. Snails love water. And Hisuian Gudra with Water Compaction could be cool. Switch in on a water move and gain a huge body press, plus you're ramping up your defense. And you resist water. A theoretically great ability, Water Compaction. Perhaps an underutilized one. I like these abilities that play around with type interactions in unique ways. I think it's a well-designed ability that unfortunately just isn't really showcased very much, but in theory it could be a fantastic ability on the right Pokemon. Now the next ability is actually just a good one that is on a good Pokemon, but I still feel it's under-discussed and a bit underrated. The ability Infiltrator. This ability has the effect of ignoring enemy substitutes when dealing damage, and also ignoring the effects of defensive screen mechanics like Reflect Light Screen and Aurora Veil. And the most prominent user of Infiltrator in competitive singles is Dragapult, who is a very good Pokemon. Dragapult would probably be good if it had anything other than Infiltrator. If they just got rid of Infiltrator and it had to use one of its other abilities instead, the Pokemon would still be fine, of course. It's just so fundamentally solid with great typing, move pool, and stats, but Infiltrator certainly doesn't help, and it is the best ability choice on it much of the time. Substitute is kind of a universal Pokemon mechanic. It's something you see in every tier. Substitute is a move that will simply subtract 25% of your health and place a plush toy in front of you to take the damage for you in your place. It's a nice way to just pass a turn and create this little shield in front of you. And it's also good because it prevents status. You are sort of immune to status while the substitute is up, because the status is not targeting you directly. A lot of Pokemon use substitute as an opportunity to set up boosts or just gain free turns by substituting when they're at an advantage, and then having the shield to protect them from incoming damage on a later turn. But Infiltrator, being able to completely ignore substitute, is just so great. It was foolish of these Pokemon to think that a mere plush toy could shield them with paramount security. Dragapult has infiltrated their defense. And no plush toy, not even a Labubu, could defend against that level of infiltration skill. And powering through the screens is also really good. Reflect and Light Screen are commonly used on hyper offense teams to enhance boost sweepers and reduce incoming damage so that they can safely boost up and sweep battles. Having this safety net against such a strategy is always very useful, especially because you're essentially erasing multiple turns that the enemy spent setting up the screens by completely ignoring them. It's another example of an ability that sounds kind of boring when you say it out loud. It's a form of counterplay against a couple specific mechanics, but it's just surprising how often this comes up and how frequently you find Infiltrator to be really useful. I can think of multiple times where Infiltrator has saved me a game by powering through a sub or a defensive screen. Up next we have the ability Pickpocket. A bit of an immoral ability, yes, but undeniably useful on the battlefield, and one that I lacked respect for until kind of recently, actually. This is not an ability I ever really thought about and would have scoffed at and laughed at. But here's what Pickpocket does. If this Pokemon has no item and is hit by a contact move, it steals the attacker's item. Not very exciting, you'd think. But recently, a set on the Pokemon Tinkaton made me realize that this ability actually has some underrated merit. And it's interesting because Tinkaton also has access to the ability Mold Breaker, which is conventionally a far more popular and good ability. Mold Breaker will ignore enemy abilities, which is generally very useful, but players started to use Pickpocket instead of Mold Breaker, which I found crazy at first. But it turned out that Pickpocket had a really cool synergy with the item Air Balloon. Air Balloon is a good competitive item that grants a temporary immunity to ground. But whenever you get hit by an attack, the Air Balloon will pop and the ground immunity will go away. A nice item on Pokemon that are weak to ground especially. Pokemon often use this item just in general, but this item is actually amazing specifically with Pickpocket, because once the balloon is popped, and if the balloon was popped by a contact attack, Pickpocket will activate and you will immediately steal the enemy's item. So you kind of get to have two items. You get the effect of the air balloon, and the moment the air balloon is popped, you have no item, and Pickpocket takes effect, stealing the attacker's item. It's brilliant, and Tinkaton is the first Pokemon to ever really take good advantage of this synergy that I'm aware of, but it's really fantastic, especially in the face of like a Great Tusk, who is trying to hit you with Headlong Rush, but you're immune, and if it tries to break the balloon, it will lose its item. So you're kind of putting Great Tusk in this really awkward situation where to power through you, it has to sacrifice its item and give it to you, which is not very good. This synergy gives Tinkaton a complete safety net with which to select Stealth Rock at the start of a game. And it's also really nice to get rid of the heavy-duty boots on a Great Tusk or an Iron Treads. The same applies to Iron Treads early on, because then they won't be able to be immune to hazard damage, and you can over time chip them down and eliminate them, removing their Rapid Spinner and now having free reign to set your own hazards. So Pickpocket Tinkaton actually rose up as the more popular set than Mold Breaker, which is kind of insane. And once again, it's a bit immoral for Tinkaton to have to resort to thievery to find a niche for itself in OU, but sometimes situations and circumstances push people to strange life paths. And I suppose on the battlefield, people are already hitting each other and defeating each other, so a bit of thievery is fair play in a world of violence and chaos, isn't it? So I don't have any moral judgments to push upon Tinkaton. I wonder if I was a Pokemon, if I would have the ability Pickpocket. I suppose if I could do anything, I could pickpocket a Pokemon's item. That would maybe be what I could do if I would achieve anything. I wouldn't give myself very high odds to come out of the Pokemon battlefield alive, but I would give it my best go. Speaking of thievery, another ability that is able to steal the enemy's item, it is actually kind of good when you think about it, is the ability Magician. Magician is kind of similar to Pickpocket. If this Pokemon has no item, it steals the item from an enemy Pokemon it hits with an attack. So you can kind of start the game with an inbuilt thief. If you just don't run an item and attack the enemy, you will steal their item. Or Magician can be used alongside a consumable item like a berry. You can consume the berry, and then once the berry is gone, you can steal the enemy's item for a bit of double dipping, similar to the Pickpocket Air Balloon synergy I spoke just about. And there is a Pokemon that has taken some advantage of this ability in a competitive context. Hoopa. Hoopa, with the ability Magician and a consumable berry like a citrus berry, can double dip, get the value from the citrus berry, and then steal a powerful item from an opponent to achieve some incredible things. This ability is just a little bit underused. Delphox has it, but Delphox is not very good. Klefki has it, but Klefki, of course, would rather use Prankster. It's far better at using Prankster. And Hoopa is the most effective user of it we've seen. Hoopa does actually get some value out of it in a real context. But I'm sure Magician could be better showcased on a more powerful Pokemon. I mean, imagine, for example, if Garchomp got Magician. Now, this would make no thematic sense unless perhaps Garchomp has a hidden identity that we're not aware of. But a common set in past gens is Yachi Berry Garchomp, because Garchomp is times 4 weak to ice. So you hit Garchomp with an ice type attack and it survives and then makes Stealth Rock, or it attacks you and KOs you, or something high value like that. So what if upon consuming this Yachi Berry, it could then attack you and steal your item? I think that would be pretty great. Garchomp would get so much more value, an entire item removed from the scene. Perhaps one that allows Garchomp to get a bit more value. Or maybe what if Rabombi could learn Magician? Rabombi is a bit magical. You could see it in a magical forest or somewhere. That's not too much of a stretch. And if Rabombi had a Magician, it could set Sticky Web, be brought down to its focus sash, and then steal an item as well for further value. This would be a great ability on these sort of sacrificial lead sets, or other aggressive Pokemon that might want to use a Type Berry to live a hit and then defeat the enemy through thievery. This ability would work best on a Pokemon that tends to use consumable items anyway. That's why it kind of stinks on Delphox. This is a Pokemon that doesn't really want to use consumable items. Hoopa can, but even Hoopa would like to use Choice Scarf much of the time, or leftovers or other held items, so Magician can sometimes be awkward to activate in those cases. But on the right Pokemon, this could be a great ability. Up next is the ability Bulletproof. I love an ability that offers interesting immunities, and Bulletproof is actually really great. Bulletproof grants a complete immunity to bullet-based moves, or ballistic moves as they're classified. Any move that involves a bullet or a ball is probably going to be blocked by Bulletproof. And this is actually a lot of relevant moves. It might not sound that amazing to be immune to such specific moves, but then you remember that Shadow Ball is a ballistic move. Bulletproof Pokemon are completely immune to Shadow Ball, and this is actually one of the most commonly used attacks in Pokemon. Since Ghosts are such a prevalent type and Shadow Ball is their best attack usually on the special side, being completely immune to Shadow Ball is absolutely massive. That's probably the best thing to be immune to with Bulletproof. But there's more than that. You're also immune to Sludge Bomb, which is often the best poison attack of choice. Some other relevant moves you are immune to with Bulletproof include Bullet Seed, of course, it has bullet in the name. You're immune to Aura Sphere, Gyro Ball, Pyro Ball from Cinderace, that's a nice one. You're immune to Seed Bomb, Energy Ball, Focus Blast, which I suppose is a ball of energy as well. And for some reason you're immune to Beak Blast with Bulletproof. Why would you be immune to Beak Blast? I guess it's a blast, like a bullet. Seems a bit rude to Toucannon to block Beak Blast of all things. But that's another one. That's not going to be very relevant to the lives of most unless you're facing a Toucannon, which you probably aren't. I doubt you're facing a Toucannon, but just in case you are, if you've got a bulletproof Pokemon, don't worry about Beak Blast. Don't worry about it. I promise you, you'll be alright. The most prominent abuser of Bulletproof is probably Como-O, who is quite good in Gen 7 OU and Gen 8 OU. And Bulletproof is one of its available abilities, and usually the preferable one, as it allows switches into Shadow Ball and Focus Blast and other things, all the things I just mentioned, all the relevant moves I just mentioned, which may be a specific set of moves, but some of these are really common, and you'll often find entry points enabled by a Bulletproof. It comes in handy all the time. And in Generation 9, players have found Chestnut to be actually surprisingly decent in OU. There was a team that reached #1 in the world with a Chestnut, in fact. Partially because it's a spiker that's good against King Gambit and has Synthesis and Body Press, which are good options on it. But also it's because of Bulletproof. Bulletproof is actually really damn good on Chestnut. Allows it an entry point against, I don't know, a Dragapult locked into Shadow Ball, perhaps a Goldengo, anything that uses Shadow Ball, which is a lot of Pokemon in Gen 9 OU. Pyro Ball immunity is actually massive against Cinderace. That's its main attack, and it's probably going to try to click it against you if not wise to the fact that you're bulletproof. To be completely immune to the massive stab fire type attack that would otherwise destroy you is actually massive. And if you give Chestnut a try in Gen 9 OU, you might find that a lot of foolish Cinderace gamers click Pyro Ball against you, only to be subsequently destroyed by a body press, which is very fun. Who knew that it would be so useful to be immune to spheres? I mean, spheres are dangerous. They can hit you and hurt you. To be immune to them is beneficial. In the real world, that would be beneficial too. I would like to have sphere immunity. Me, I'm susceptible to spheres, and I find them very frightening. But not Chestnut. Chestnut does not falter in the face of a sphere, much to his benefit. Speaking of interesting abilities, I want to give a shout out to one of my favorite new abilities in Gen 9, actually. Exclusive to the Pokemon Brambleghast, who is not very good, but his ability is awesome. The ability Wind Rider. Wind Rider grants a complete immunity to wind-based moves, which I didn't even know was a category of move until this guy existed, but apparently it is. Also, if struck by a wind-based move, its attack will be raised by 1, which is fun, and also, if Tailwind activates, its attack will be raised by 1. Tailwind is a field effect that increases the speed of all of your allies by double. So this could be a cool synergy in doubles formats where Tailwind is more prevalent, but the immunity to wind moves is really cool on Brambleghast. This is a grass ghost type, and some of the relevant moves that Brambleghast is immune to include Hurricane, which is probably the biggest one, Hurricane being a very common and popular flying type special attack. Immunity to Hurricane is great. Immunity to Blizzard is also useful. Not actually the most common move because of its inaccuracy, but it comes up occasionally. You're immune to Heat Wave, which is fire type coverage for many. Not the most prominent fire move, but you like to be immune to any fire move. And also Bleak Wind Storm, the signature move of Tornadus and its Therian form. That's a nice one. Tornadus Therian sometimes uses that. And also if it comes up, it does come up occasionally, Icy Wind you're immune to. That's much more useful in doubles as well, where that's a prominent attack. Occasionally used in singles, and certainly nice to be immune to. Nice to be immune to something. The immunities aren't as useful as that of Bulletproof. Definitely Shadow Ball and Focus Blast are more prominently used moves, but to be a grass type immune to Hurricane in particular is great. And the fact that you also get an attack boost when struck by these moves and the other benefits is really cool. I think this is a great ability that certainly gives Brambleghast a bit of identity, and you could certainly see being pretty fantastic on the right Pokemon. Maybe actually you could get something out of Tailwind with the attack boost on this. I don't believe Brambleghast itself learns Tailwind. It needs an ally to set Tailwind for it, but a good physical attack if had access to Tailwind and this ability would probably just use Tailwind even in singles, even though it's a temporary buff. To get double speed and an attack boost, you could just sweep the game off that. That's like a better version of Dragon Dance almost. That's pretty incredible. Plus you're immune to Hurricane. I mean, come on. Very fun, by the way, for a ghostly tumbleweed-themed Pokemon to be immune to the wind. Very fun to give this guy a custom ability that makes a lot of sense and is really interesting and cool. Up next is another ability exclusive to just one Pokemon. Raichu Alola has a very interesting ability, which is Surge Surfer. If electric terrain is active, this Pokemon's speed is doubled. I'm sure you can see the potential of this. A high potential ability, especially if this is existing in a format where Tapu Koko is available. Tapu Koko, an excellent electric terrain setter. This could also have a high potential in Ubers if Miraidon is allowed there, another electric terrain setter. But unfortunately, the only Pokemon that gets this is Alolan Raichu, who is just not very good. Alolan Raichu is a bit weak. It has low stats. Its special attack is only 95. And it can achieve incredible speed with Surge Surfer, but the issue with this is that in Gen 7 and Gen 8, where Tapu Koko is available, Raichu Alola is kind of filling the same role as the Tapu Koko itself. Tapu Koko is already very fast, and it's an electric-type special attacker. So you're running another of a similar Pokemon that is, yes, it's faster, but it's frail, it's difficult to get onto the field, it's difficult to actually take advantage of the guy. So Surge Surfer, in practice, doesn't help Alolan Raichu very much. You know what Pokemon I think would be cool with Surge Surfer? It might not make much sense, but I think Vikavolt would be cool with Surge Surfer. I mean, Vikavolt's worst quality is that it's very slow. But if you could pump it with some speed EVs and then throw it in the electric terrain alongside a Tapu Koko or a Pink Urchin, maybe it can make something happen. It has a great special attack, and if it's actually fast for the first time in its life, maybe it could achieve a few things. Imagine that. And plus, I think Vikavolt could go surfing. Why not? He's saying that he can't surf. Why do you think so lowly of Vikavolt that he couldn't surf? I mean, honestly, that reflects more poorly on you than it does of me. I'm expressing faith in Vikavolt's ability to learn new skills while you are putting him down and saying, no, Vikavolt, you can't surf, you can't do anything, you stupid bug. If you think that Vikavolt learning Surge Surfer would be ridiculous, then I think you are actually a mean-spirited person, and you should look in the mirror and maybe reevaluate why you think that, and why that would be so outlandish. Terrain synergy is not something they leaned into very much, interestingly, even though the Tapus were such a big part of Gen 7. Surge Surfer is only available in the rather unimpressive Alolan Raichu, and there's not much else in the way of terrain synergy except like the seed items, which aren't abilities. In Gen 9 there is Quark Drive, but you more often see Quark Drive used with Booster Energy in OU because Pink Urchin is not very good. And actually, if there was a good electric terrain setter, I bet Quark Drive would be a bit too broken, to be honest, because it would be too easy to activate. The idea of terrain synergy is interesting though, and maybe it's something they could explore again in the future. Up next we have Compound Eyes, an ability rarely seen, only a few Pokemon get this. But it's damn good. Compound Eyes grants a straight up increase to a Pokemon's accuracy. Your Pokemon's moves will have 1.3x accuracy thanks to this ability. Accuracy is huge. The reason that you run Surf instead of Hydro Pump is probably because it's accurate. Hydro Pump deals more damage, but it can miss. Everybody hates Focus Blast, for goodness sake. They wish they had a more accurate option. The more you play Pokemon, the more you realize that a 20 or 30% chance to miss a move is actually huge. So to patch that up and actually increase accuracy this much makes a huge difference. It makes an enormous difference. The Pokemon Butterfree actually has a niche in Gen 3 OU purely because of Compound Eyes. Because Compound Eyes grants Butterfree with a sleep powder that is almost perfectly accurate. It's like 99.9 something accuracy. And it has Stun Spore with accuracy. So Butterfree is the only Pokemon here that can have a perfectly accurate sleep and paralysis move. And Stun Spore is nice because it's a paralysis move that can hit ground types, unlike Thunder Wave. So with this, Butterfree can be genuinely useful in Gen 3 OU. It also has Thief to remove an item, to do something else, which is noteworthy to some people. Vivillon, the Pokemon, can also use Compound Eyes, not only to enhance the accuracy of Sleep Powder, but also Hurricane, which is a strong flying type special attack that is very inaccurate with 70% accuracy. Increasing the accuracy of this move is absolutely fantastic, because accuracy is part of the drawback, so you're erasing the drawback of the move a little bit. Vivillon is not a very good Pokemon, of course, but if there's any damn reason to use the guy, it's because of Compound Eyes. And Galvantula, the spider Pokemon, can also use Compound Eyes for a more accurate Thunder, and that's very awesome. Thunder, very similar to Hurricane, with a high power but a low 70% accuracy. So to enhance the accuracy of Thunder is very appreciated for the spider. This ability is thematically tied to bug types, because they have a lot of eyes and therefore are more accurate. It makes perfect sense. It would be unlikely for a non-bug type to ever get this, but it'd be cool to see an even more powerful Pokemon get Compound Eyes and make fun use of it with inaccurate moves in its moveset that it can then make accurate, reframing the identity of moves with that drawback baked in. We've already seen how Compound Eyes can make an otherwise terrible Pokemon kind of alright, purely because it makes inconsistent options consistent. And finally, we have Shield Dust, which is actually just a great ability that is only available on terrible Pokemon, unfortunately. Shield Dust is an ability that grants a complete immunity to the secondary effects of attacks. This is fantastic. Secondary effects are a huge part of Pokemon. Flinch chance, burn chance, paralysis chance, etc. In fact, there's even an item called the Covert Cloak that has the same effect as Shield Dust that grants immunity to secondary effects, and this is a good item. that many Pokemon choose to use for immunity to effects like Scald, Burn, etc. So Shield Dust is clearly fantastic. This would be incredibly useful on any Pokemon blessed enough to receive it, like for example, Dustox. Dustox is one of the only Pokemon to have Shield Dust. What is Dustox doing with Shield Dust? As if it's living a hit to begin with, to survive an incoming secondary effect? I mean, come on. They gave it to Dustox, for goodness sake. Vivillon does get it. Vivillon? How do you pronounce that? Who of you has seen the Pokemon anime and knows how to pronounce this? Who's seen it? Vivillon gets Shield Dust. And yet it would rather use its ability Compound Eyes instead, if given the opportunity, which allows it to hit Sleep Powder more accurately. So Vivillon is not great at using it. Not a good defensive Pokemon either. And then Venomoth gets it, but Venomoth would also rather use a different ability, Tinted Lens, which is far better. And it's not well suited to using Shield Dust. Also not a defensive Pokemon. They didn't give Shield Dust to any good defensive Pokemon. It's all these weird bugs that have this damn ability. The most relevant use of Shield Dust is on the Pokemon Ribombee, who you'll also notice is not really a defensive Pokemon at all. But it can get a little bit of value out of Shield Dust. Shield Dust at least means it cannot be affected by Nuzzle Paralysis when it's trying to set Sticky Web. It also means that Mortal Spin, the hazard-removing move that Glamora likes to utilize, will not be able to inflict Ribombee with poison, which is useful in hazard-setting 1 versus 1 scenarios. And there's other applications, I suppose. Not being able to get Scald burned is good. You never have your sash consumed by the burn. Same with Poison Chance on Sludge Bomb and such, and Body Slam Paralysis cannot ruin your life. Other than Ribombee, though, not much else takes any real advantage of Shield Dust. And I'm sure if Ribombee got any other half-decent offensively geared ability, it would just use that instead. Shield Dust is just the best it's got. But the potential of this ability is through the roof. A good defensive Pokemon with this ability would be fantastic, and I hope that something gets it. I think that this would actually be a welcome ability addition to a good competitive Pokemon, because insurance against secondary effects would feel fantastic. The addition of Covert Cloak, I think, was a good one. It's a nice item to have as counterplay to a very prominent mechanic, and I feel the same about Shield Dust, and I wish that something good that could actually make use of it existed. I truly do. And there you go, folks, some underrated Pokemon abilities, all of which I think are cool and well-designed and fun. These aren't the S-tier most elite abilities in the game, like Magic Guard or Regenerator or whatever, but it's nice to have abilities that just do a specific thing that is more useful than you expect. I actually think that's good game design. It's no fun when an ability does everything, like Magic Guard might do too much. So I personally appreciate abilities like Bulletproof or Wind Rider that offer very specific immunities that are far more useful than initially expected. What do you think though, folks? Let me know down below in the comments. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel if you would like to see more. Thank you very much for watching.